In 1963, General Motors had one rule that no division was allowed to break. Pontiac broke it anyway, and the result was the most important American car of the decade. The Pontiac GTO did not just bend a corporate policy, it shattered an entire philosophy about what a mid-size car was supposed to be, and forced every manufacturer in Detroit to scramble for an answer. What makes this story remarkable is not just the car, it is how it got built. A small group of engineers found a loophole their own bosses never saw coming, smuggled a big block engine into a sedan that was never supposed to have one, and accidentally launched an arms race that would define American performance for the next 10 years. This is how the Pontiac GTO broke General Motors' own rules and started the muscle car war. To understand why the GTO happened, you have to understand what Pontiac was in the mid-1950s. It was the old man's car. Pontiac sat in the middle of the General Motors lineup, wedged between the affordable Chevrolet and the aspirational Buick, and it had settled into a comfortable irrelevance. The styling was conservative, the engineering was adequate, the interiors were tasteful in a way that nobody under 40 found interesting. The average Pontiac buyer was well past 50, and the brand's entire identity was built around that customer. General Motors was fine with this. The corporation ran on a ladder system, 5 brands arranged from bottom to top. Chevrolet at the entry level, Pontiac one step up, Oldsmobile for the professional class, Buick for the established, Cadillac at the pinnacle. Each brand had its rung, each rung had its customer, and the whole structure worked because every division stayed in its lane and did not poach from the others. Pontiac's lane was quiet, predictable, and profitable enough that nobody in the corporate office saw any reason to change it. Then Seaman Knudsen walked in. Knudsen, called Bunky by everyone in the industry, became Pontiac's general manager in 1956 and immediately set about tearing the brand apart. He was young for a division head at GM, aggressive by the standards of a corporation that valued consensus over speed, and entirely uninterested in selling cars to retirees. His first visible move was small but symbolic. He ordered the ornamental chrome strips pulled off the hoods of the 1957 models. The strips were decorative and old-fashioned, and removing them gave the cars a cleaner, more aggressive profile. It signaled what was coming. Knudsen pushed Pontiac's engineering department to build bigger, more serious engines. He backed a new advertising campaign built around the phrase "wide track," a reference to the car's wider stance and bigger tires, and it repositioned the entire brand almost overnight. The ads did not talk about reliability or value or comfort. They talked about presence, about how the car felt on the road, about what it looked like pulling into a parking lot. It worked. By the end of the decade, Pontiac had climbed from 6th in industry sales to 3rd, trailing only Chevrolet and Ford. The transformation was one of the most dramatic brand turnarounds in American automotive history. The old man's car was gone, replaced by something younger, louder, and increasingly hungry for the one thing that GM's corporate office was not willing to give it: unrestricted horsepower. The barrier was not a law. It was a corporate policy, and it had roots in a decision that the entire American auto industry had made together. In 1957, the Automobile Manufacturers Association signed a voluntary agreement to pull back from the performance race that had been accelerating through the 1950s. Manufacturers agreed to stop advertising horsepower, withdraw factory support from organized racing, and generally stop encouraging the idea that their cars were built to go fast. The agreement was a response to growing public concern about highway safety, a political calculation designed to head off potential government regulation before it arrived. General Motors, as the largest and most visible manufacturer, committed to the agreement more visibly than its competitors. While Ford and Chrysler quietly continued their performance programs through various back channels, GM's corporate leadership enforced the spirit of the ban internally. The 14th floor of the General Motors building in Detroit, where the senior executives sat, issued directives that restricted what each division could offer in its mid-size cars. The key restriction was on engine displacement. The A-body platform, the mid-size architecture shared across GM's divisions as the Pontiac Tempest, the Chevrolet Chevelle, the Oldsmobile Cutlass, and the Buick Skylark, was subject to a cap on how large an engine could be installed. Anything above roughly 330 cubic inches was reserved for full-size cars only. The logic was straightforward in a corporate liability kind of way. Full-size cars were heavier, more expensive, and bought by older drivers. A smaller, lighter, cheaper car with a massive engine was a car that a young buyer could afford, and a young buyer in a fast car was, in the view of GM's leadership, a risk the corporation did not need. The restriction was enforced through GM's internal approval process. Every new model, every significant option package, every powertrain combination had to pass through a corporate engineering review before it could reach production. If the committee saw a big engine in a small car, the project was dead. The system was designed to be airtight. No division could simply build whatever it wanted and send it to the dealers without corporate sign-off. For several years, every GM division followed the rule. Pontiac's engineers knew they could fit a bigger engine in the Tempest. They also knew that any formal proposal to do so would be rejected before it left the conference room. The only way to get a big engine into that car was to find a path that did not go through the conference room at all. John Zachary DeLorean became Pontiac's chief engineer in 1961, and from the beginning he operated differently than the GM corporate culture expected. He dressed differently, the tailored suits and the open collar in a world of white shirts and narrow ties. He thought differently, questioning the assumptions that kept the divisions inside their designated lanes. And he was, by every credible account, an exceptional engineer who understood both the mechanical and the commercial sides of what made a car succeed. By 1963, DeLorean was looking at the redesigned Tempest scheduled for the 1964 model year. The new A-body platform was clean, modern, and lighter than its predecessor. More importantly, the engine bay had the physical space to accommodate Pontiac's 389 cubic inch V8, the same engine that powered the full-size Bonneville and Grand Prix. The swap was mechanically feasible. The suspension could be upgraded. The drivetrain could be reinforced. Everything lined up except the rule. DeLorean's solution was not to challenge the rule directly. It was to step around it. The corporate policy restricted the standard powertrain configurations that defined a model as it came off the line. A new car with a big engine required full corporate review, but an option package was a different category. Options were additions to an existing approved model. They went through a different approval pathway, one that did not always trigger the same level of scrutiny from the 14th floor. Working with Bill Collins, his assistant chief engineer, and Russell G., who handled the engine calibration and tuning, DeLorean developed what he designated the GTO option package. It was not listed as a new car. On paper, it was a performance upgrade available on the Tempest Le Mans Coupe, hardtop, or convertible. The core of the package was the 389 V8, offered in two configurations. The standard version ran a single 4-barrel carburetor and was rated at 325 horsepower. The optional tri-power setup, 3 2-barrel carburetors on a single intake manifold, was rated at 348 horsepower. A 4-speed manual transmission with a Hurst shifter came standard. Heavy-duty suspension, stiffer springs, a thicker front stabilizer bar, dual exhaust, and premium redline tires completed the transformation. The result was a car that weighed roughly 3,400 pounds and produced enough power to run the quarter mile in the low 14s. In a straight line, it could hold its own against nearly anything on the road that cost less than twice its price. The plausible deniability was built into the structure. If anyone on the 14th floor raised an objection, Pontiac's answer was ready. The Tempest Le Mans itself complied with the displacement guidelines. The GTO package was simply an option that the buyer chose. The factory was not building a prohibited car. It was offering an approved car with an available upgrade. The distinction was transparent to anyone paying attention, but it was technically defensible, and inside a bureaucracy the size of General Motors, technically defensible was the only clearance you needed. DeLorean moved the project through Pontiac's internal approvals with deliberate speed and minimal noise. By the time the corporate engineering committee fully understood what the GTO package contained, the tooling was done, the parts were ordered, and the car was heading for the assembly line. The name was a declaration of war disguised as 3 letters. GTO stood for Gran Turismo Homologado, a designation that belonged in the minds of anyone who followed motorsport to one car, the Ferrari 250 GTO. The Ferrari was one of the most revered competition cars in history, a hand-built machine that had earned its designation through the formal process of racing homologation. Roughly 3 dozen were ever made. Each one was worth a fortune, even when new. DeLorean chose the name with full knowledge of what it implied. He wanted the association. He wanted a buyer reading the badge on the fender of a Pontiac to think, even for a moment, about a Ferrari. It was aspirational in the most American sense, a promise that this car, built in a factory in Michigan and sold for roughly $3,000, operated in the same emotional territory as the most exclusive sports car in the world. Enzo Ferrari, by most accounts, was not pleased. The Italian manufacturer considered the use of the GTO designation on a Pontiac to be somewhere between disrespectful and outrageous. Whether Ferrari formally objected or simply expressed displeasure through back channels depends on which telling of the story you follow. What Ferrari did not do was file a lawsuit that stopped the name from being used, which may reflect the practical difficulties of enforcing a European trademark in the American market in the 1960s more than any acceptance of the situation. For the domestic market, the name did exactly what DeLorean intended. GTO carried weight. It sounded exotic and purposeful in a way that no combination of English words on a trunk lid could match. It separated the car from the Tempest, from the Le Mans, from every other name in the Pontiac catalog. Those 3 letters, borrowed without permission from the other side of the Atlantic, transformed what was technically a mid-size sedan with a big engine into something that felt like a statement. The car needed a champion outside the engineering department, and it got one in Jim Wangers. Wangers held the title of advertising and promotion manager at Pontiac, but calling him an ad executive misses what made him effective. He was a competitive drag racer who understood the performance community not from a conference room but from the staging lanes. He knew what enthusiasts read, what they argued about at car meets, and what convinced them to walk into a dealership. Wangers understood that the GTO's success would not be determined by television commercials or newspaper ads. It would be determined by magazine reviews and drag strip results. Young performance buyers trusted 2 sources: what the car journalists wrote and what the car actually did on a track. Wangers set out to deliver on both. He arranged for Car and Driver magazine to test the GTO, and the resulting article became one of the most talked about pieces of automotive journalism of the decade. The magazine compared the Pontiac GTO directly with the Ferrari GTO. The comparison was deliberately provocative. One car cost roughly $3,000 and could be ordered at any Pontiac dealer in the country. The other was one of the rarest and most expensive automobiles on Earth. The magazine did not claim the Pontiac was a better car than the Ferrari. What it argued was that the Pontiac delivered more excitement per dollar than anything else available, and that within the context of what a real person could actually buy and drive every day, it was the more thrilling ownership experience. The article generated exactly the kind of controversy that sells cars. People argued about it in garages and parking lots and letters to the editor for months. Every argument was free publicity. On the drag strip, Wangers worked closely with Royal Pontiac, a dealership in Royal Oak, Michigan, that had evolved into Pontiac's unofficial performance workshop. Royal Pontiac prepared GTOs with careful tuning, optimized ignition timing, and the kind of mechanical attention that extracted every available horsepower from the 389. These cars ran at sanctioned events and won consistently enough to establish the GTO's credibility with the enthusiast community that powered word-of-mouth sales. Wangers also grasped something about youth marketing that the rest of Detroit had not yet figured out. He did not oversell the car. He placed it in the right contexts, let it perform, and trusted the community to spread the word on its own terms. The GTO did not need a hard sell. It needed to show up, prove itself, and let the conversation happen naturally. By the time the first full model year was over, the conversation had reached every garage, every drive-in, and every high school parking lot in America. Pontiac's internal projections for the GTO package were conservative to the point of timidity. The division expected to sell roughly 5,000 units in the 1964 model year. 5,000 was the kind of number you projected when you were not sure a product would work, but wanted to justify the tooling costs. It assumed that a big engine in a mid-size car was a niche proposition, interesting to a small core of performance buyers but irrelevant to the broader market. The projection was wrong by a margin that embarrassed the people who made it. By the end of the model year, Pontiac had moved somewhere in the range of 32,000 GTOs. The car was not a niche product, it was a phenomenon. Dealers across the country reported the same scene. Customers were walking into Pontiac showrooms, past the Bonnevilles and Catalinas and Star Chiefs that had been the division's traditional volume sellers, and heading straight for the GTO. Many of these buyers were young, in their 20s and early 30s, people who had never set foot in a Pontiac dealership before and had no interest in anything else on the floor. They came for one car, and if the dealer did not have one in stock, they were willing to wait. Supplies struggled to keep pace. The Pontiac assembly line had not been configured to produce GTO packages at that volume. The tri-power engine option was particularly constrained, and dealers found themselves managing waiting lists that stretched for weeks. The scarcity only amplified the demand. A car that you had to wait for was a car worth talking about, and the GTO was already the most discussed car in America. The financial implications radiated outward through General Motors. Pontiac had identified and captured a market segment that the corporate office had either not recognized or had deliberately chosen to suppress. Tens of thousands of young buyers with money to spend and a clear preference for performance were lining up at Pontiac dealerships because Pontiac was the only GM division offering them what they wanted. The revenue was real, the margins were solid, and the demographic was exactly the one that every automaker in the country was trying to reach. The 14th floor faced a straightforward calculation: enforce the displacement policy, shut down the GTO, and watch those buyers walk across the street to Ford or Chrysler, or acknowledge what DeLorean had proven and adjust the rules to match reality. General Motors has always been many things. Foolish about revenue has never been one of them. The rest of the industry did not need a memo to understand what the GTO's sales figures meant. If Pontiac could move over 30,000 mid-size performance cars in a single model year, then every manufacturer with a V8 and an intermediate platform could chase the same buyers. The muscle car war did not begin with a formal declaration. It began with a scramble. Chevrolet, Pontiac's own corporate sibling within General Motors, responded in 1965 with the Chevelle SS 396. The car dropped a 396 cubic inch big block into Chevrolet's A-body intermediate and targeted the exact same buyer that the GTO had found. The irony was not subtle. General Motors had created a corporate policy specifically to prevent this kind of car, and now two of its own divisions were building them in direct competition with each other for the same showroom traffic. Ford had already been moving in a parallel direction. The Mustang, launched in April 1964, was a different formula, a sporty compact built on a Falcon platform rather than a true midsize muscle car, but it proved the same fundamental thesis. Young buyers wanted affordable performance, and they would buy it in enormous quantities. By 1967, Ford was offering the Mustang with big block engines, and the Shelby GT350 and GT500 variants pushed the car deep into high-performance territory. Plymouth waited until 1968 and then delivered the Roadrunner, a car that took the GTO formula and stripped it to the bone. Where the GTO carried European aspirations in its name and upscale trim on its interior, the Roadrunner was deliberately crude. It had a cartoon bird on the fender. The horn mimicked the character's signature beep. The interior was basic, the options list was short, and the standard engine was a 383 cubic inch V8 that could be replaced with the legendary 426 Hemi for buyers with deeper pockets. The Roadrunner undercut the GTO on price, matched it on raw power, and moved over 40,000 units in its first year. The list kept growing. Oldsmobile built the 442. Buick offered the Grand Sport. Dodge escalated with the Charger RT and the Super Bee. Even American Motors, the smallest domestic manufacturer, entered the war with the SC Rambler. By the end of the 1960s, every significant American automaker offered at least one mid-size car with a big block engine and enough torque to vaporize the rear tires from a dead stop. None of those cars would have existed in the form they took without the GTO. Not because the idea of putting a large engine in a smaller car was original. That concept was as old as the hot rod, but because the GTO proved it worked as a mass-market factory product. Pontiac demonstrated that tens of thousands of buyers, not a few hundred dedicated enthusiasts, would pay for a performance car they could drive to work on Monday and race on Saturday. By 1966, the displacement restriction that had created the entire GTO story simply ceased to exist. General Motors dropped the policy on its intermediate cars, and the GTO was elevated from an option package on the Tempest Le Mans to a standalone model in the Pontiac lineup. The loophole was no longer necessary because the rule it had circumvented was gone. DeLorean, by then promoted to general manager of the entire Pontiac division, continued to push the car forward. The 1966 GTO received fresh styling and remained the benchmark against which every other muscle car was measured. In 1967, Pontiac introduced the Ram air engine option with functional hood scoops that ducted cold outside air directly into the carburetor, measurably improving output. Each model year brought escalation, more aggressive engines, wider tires, new appearance options, and the constant pressure to stay ahead of the competitors that Pontiac itself had created. The commercial peak landed in 1966, when Pontiac sold over 96,000 GTOs. It was a staggering number for a performance car, but it also marked a high water line. The market that the GTO had opened was now crowded. A young buyer walking into a dealership in 1969 had a dozen fast mid-size options to choose from where 5 years earlier there had been one. Every Chevelle SS, every Roadrunner, every Charger RT took a share of the audience that the GTO had originally owned alone. Then the pressures arrived from outside Detroit. Insurance companies, alarmed by accident rates among young drivers in high-horsepower cars, began raising premiums on muscle cars to levels that put them beyond the reach of their intended buyers. A young man who could afford the monthly car payment often could not afford the insurance to go with it, and the actuarial tables were not open to negotiation. Federal emissions standards tightened through the late 1960s and early 1970s, forcing manufacturers to detune their engines and add equipment that sapped power. The era of advertised horsepower in the 300s and 400s was ending. The 1973 oil crisis finished it. Gasoline prices spiked, lines formed at filling stations, and a car that delivered single-digit fuel economy went from desirable to indefensible overnight. Pontiac produced the last original generation GTO in 1974, by which point annual sales had fallen below 10,000. The muscle car era was over, compressed into roughly a decade of escalating horsepower that had burned with extraordinary intensity and then consumed itself. The Pontiac GTO did not invent the concept of a fast car. Fast cars existed before there were paved roads to drive them on. What the GTO created was the muscle car as a deliberate product category, a specific formula of big displacement engine, mid-size body, affordable price, and youth-oriented marketing that did not exist as a coherent factory strategy before 1964. Before the GTO, serious performance from a new car meant buying at the top of the market. A Corvette, a Thunderbird, a full-size sedan with the biggest available engine checked on the order form. Those were expensive cars aimed at buyers who had already established themselves. The alternative was building speed yourself, buying a used car and bolting on parts from a speed shop until it could compete on a Saturday night. The GTO closed that gap. It was a factory-built performance car that a buyer in his mid-20s working a regular job could afford on monthly payments. No wrenching required. Drive it off the lot and straight to the strip. The formula sounds obvious in hindsight. Take the biggest engine your division builds, install it in a lighter, cheaper car, sell it to young people. But obvious and proven are not the same thing before someone takes the risk. The prevailing view inside General Motors before 1964 was that young buyers wanted style and a manageable price, not brute horsepower. DeLorean, Collins, G, and Wangers proved that assumption wrong by roughly 27,000 more sales than anyone had predicted. John DeLorean's career after Pontiac took him through the general manager's chair at Chevrolet and eventually to his own car company in Northern Ireland, where he built the stainless steel sports car that became famous not for its performance, but for a starring role in a movie about time travel. His later years grew complicated and frequently difficult, but the GTO remains the purest expression of what he understood better than nearly anyone at General Motors. The rules are only the rules until someone builds the car that proves they should never have existed. The Pontiac GTO started as a checkbox on a dealer's order form, an option package that did not technically violate the policy it was designed to walk around. It became the car that launched an entirely new category of American automobile, one that consumed Detroit for the better part of a decade and produced some of the most memorable machines ever built on this continent. Every Chevelle SS, every Charger, every Roadrunner with a Hemi under the hood traces a direct line back to the moment when a small team at Pontiac decided that what their customers wanted mattered more than what the corporate office allowed. If you made it to the end, hit subscribe. I will see you in the next one.